Hi everyone, today we're getting into the life of Beethoven. Now, hopefully, we're going to be able to blast through his life and career today, and then dedicate the next lecture to his musical contributions and style. So, here's our guy. He took this picture years ago at the Royal Academy of Music in London. Apparently, filters work on statues. Anyways, this is Ludwig van Beethoven, and on the screen you'll see his date 1770 to 1827. Not an exceptionally long life, but definitely better than our guy Mozart. He's born to a family of musicians in a city called Bonn in Germany. His grandfather, also named Ludwig, was a big time musician and was Kapellmeister to the Archbishop elect of Cologne. Despite his grandfather dying when Ludwig was only 3 years old, his presence loomed large in young Beethoven's life, and a portrait of his grandfather was kept in Beethoven's room. Beethoven's dad, Johann, was also a musician, and he worked as a singer and instrumentalist in the same court as his father. Johann, however, was an alcoholic and kind of a general piece of garbage who would persistently beat Ludwig. Now, Ludwig was actually one of 7 kids, but only 3 of them survived infancy, and they were all boys. Despite these beatings, Johann worked on building his kid's career and had Ludwig learn violin, keyboard instruments, and composition. But even this was actually quite abusive. One of his teachers was this guy named Tobias Friedrich Pfeiffer, who was an insomniac and would force Ludwig to wake up in the middle of the night to practice. Ludwig was clearly a talented kid, and his dad Johann wanted to turn him into the next big prodigy. And he went so far as claiming that Ludwig was younger than he really was. He was really aiming to create the next Mozart. Around 1780-81, Ludwig starts studying composition with this guy named Christian Neef, who was the court organist in Bonn. And just a few years after starting his studies with Neef, he released his first published composition, which was music for the keyboard. Around 1787, Beethoven makes a pilgrimage to Vienna, and it seems likely that he met Mozart during this time, but he was forced to come back soon after to Bonn, when his mother got sick and passed away. Well, Beethoven stays in Bonn. He doesn't go back to Vienna right away, and he decides, well, he's in Bonn, he might as well make the most of this, and he works as an organist and a violist in court orchestras, cue the viola jokes. And he's really taking care of his family here because his dad gets fired from the court in 1789 because of his alcoholism, and some orders made that half of the dad, Johann's pension, should go to Ludwig so that Ludwig can take care of his family's affairs, particularly those of his brothers Caspar and Nicholas. 1792, Ludwig meets Haydn in Bonn as Haydn is returning to Vienna from London, and he gets to study with Haydn for some short period of time. Beethoven ends up dedicating his first 3 piano sonatas to Haydn. Now remember that Haydn also acted as some kind of a mentor to Mozart, so he is directly related to both of his classical successors. In 1792, Ludwig makes his big move to Vienna. And because of the close relationship between the courts of Bonn and Vienna, it helped Ludwig to some degree in getting established in his new city. Something interesting about Beethoven's time in Vienna is that he actually spent some time studying with Antonio Salieri, who is, popularly, according to this Mozartian myth, seen as being Mozart's big rival, which if you've seen the movie Amadeus, you'll sort of know the fictionalized account of this. Now, Beethoven wasn't super into composition but he was more into the performing scene. And he became well known for his improvisatory ability. Now, around this time, the Revolutionary War was stirring in France and beyond, and it looked like Bonn was going to fall, which it did end up doing in 1794. And that really solidified Beethoven's decision to stay in Vienna. This wasn't the end of the world for Beethoven, though, because his connections in Vienna were paying off, and he was starting to get a lot of commissions and various important patrons, including the Prince Lobkowitz, a prince named Lichnowsky, and a count named Razumovsky. However, Ludwig didn't always get along great with his patrons, and Ludwig, a fairly hot-headed dude, would let his anger out when his patrons ticked him off. Once writing to one of his patrons, quote, "Prince, what you are by accident of birth. What I am of myself. There are and will be thousands of princes, but there is only one Beethoven." Now, in fairness, he's not really wrong. So, I guess it's pretty fair. In 1795, Beethoven gave his first solo concert in Vienna, performing one of his own works, a concerto. He then went on to perform in Prague, Dresden, Leipzig, and Berlin. Ludwig also had a lot of, as the RCM calls them, quote, romantic infatuations, unquote, but he never married. He notably composed a 10-page letter to someone named the Immortal Beloved in 1812, although this letter was never sent, and historians aren't quite sure who the intended recipient was, although there's a lot of speculation. Now, if there's one thing that your non-classical music junkie knows about Beethoven, is that he was deaf. However, Beethoven wasn't deaf from birth. His hearing really started to go during his 20s, and though he tried to utilize various medical interventions to fix it, quite obviously nothing worked. There's this sort of rumor that his deafness was caused by his dad's beatings, but that's not really confirmed in any way to the best of my knowledge. 1802. Things are getting pretty bad with his hearing, and he writes this letter, which he never actually ends up sending, which seems like a common trait with this guy. But this letter is later found after he died, and it's now known as the Heiligenstadt Testament. In this letter, he explains that he's thinking about committing suicide, in great part due to the loss of his hearing, but as we know, since Beethoven lives past 1802, he perseveres and learns to, at least in some way, cope as an increasingly deaf musician. Beethoven was a proponent of the French Revolution's motto, Liberté, Égalité, Fraternité, or Liberty, Equality, and Fraternity, and he planned on dedicating his third symphony, named Eroica, after Napoleon Bonaparte. This guy. However, Napoleon declares himself emperor in 1804, and this action causes Beethoven to get disillusioned with the leader. And he scratches out the dedication to Napoleon in the symphony. And when it was published in 1806, the subtitle to the piece stated, "To celebrate the memory of a great man." In 1814, Beethoven makes his last piano concert, performing his Archduke piano trio. Now, there's a lot in the back of his life that would be good for you to read up on, but it's really beyond the scope of this course, and I think it would overcomplicate things by giving you too much information here. I've already really given you more than you need. But as always, I'd really encourage you to go and do some more of your own research about Beethoven. He's this fascinating guy. I think with him in particular, you learn a lot about the zeitgeist by studying his life. Anyways, back to it. It's worth making a quick note that Beethoven was I guess, as you might expect, a pretty terrible tenant. And he moved just a staggering number of times, 33 times in 35 years. He was apparently a unhygienic mess and was kind of nasty to his landlords. 1820, Beethoven gets into a custody battle with his sister-in-law, who is the widow of his brother Caspar, who had passed away 5 years earlier. And this custody battle is over. His nephew Karl. Karl becomes, well, he becomes important to Ludwig, but Ludwig doesn't always treat Karl very well, and the relationship gets very, very complicated. By this point, Beethoven is just completely deaf, and to communicate, he has to converse with people by writing in notebooks. He gets more and more reclusive as he ages, and things take their final turn in 1826, when his nephew Karl attempts suicide by shooting himself. The attempt was unsuccessful, but it seemingly broke Beethoven. And his health took a really big turn for the worse. And after what may have been a battle with pneumonia, he died on the 26th of March, 1827. I think somewhat heartwarmingly, his funeral was attended by around 10,000 people. And that is the quick, under 12-minute life and times of Ludwig van Beethoven. So keep an eye out for our musical style and contributions video coming up soon. Thank you for watching.